Welcome everyone. I'm Don Brower. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Notre Dame, and I will be hosting today's conference sessions. So I guess if you're here, that means you found the Zoom link. So that's that's good. So to begin with, we have some housekeeping. I'd like to note that the webinar has live closed captioning available. Simply click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window to enable it. The conference is also being recorded. We'll post the full day video as soon as we can. And then next week, we'll edit these down into individual session videos for easier viewing and sharing. So we also have a QA button in the Zoom for typing questions to the presenters. And then there's also a raise hand feature if you'd like to unmute and ask a question. Our Connect Slack channel is a place this week for conversation with other attendees and for following up with the presenters. If you need access to the Samvera Slack workspace, there's a link in the Connect Sched where you can request access. And there's also a hashtag for Twitter users, hashtag Samvera 2022. So today, the schedule is we'll have the plenary sessions will run for just under 3 hours, and we'll have a 10-minute up break after the project updates, and then another 10-minute break at 1:20 Eastern time. That's 10:20 Pacific time. And then the schedule is online on the Sched. This, as a reminder, this is where it is, Samvera Connect 2022.sched.com. And then if you're asking, well, what about the extra 30 minutes in the schedule? Well, that is actually the birds of a feather, which we didn't have yesterday, but is today. So beginning after our plenary sessions, you'll have an option to join a 30-minute Zoom-based meeting, birds of a feather conversation group. There's a few concurrent sessions to choose from. Each one is led by a volunteer facilitator, and access information for these sessions can be found in Sched. And there still is sessions available if you'd like to facilitate a conversation tomorrow or Thursday. Everyone who registered for Connect agreed to follow our community guidelines and code of conduct. The Samvera community guidelines express our values in the context of everyday activities of the Samvera community, and they serve as the principles by which our members act and collaborate. They complement the code of conduct and the anti-harassment policy. The code of conduct expresses our expectations for respective communication as we work to interact with each other. If you haven't already, please take time to review the documents today. We expect participants at all community events and forums to honor these standards. And there's a link on this slide. And then building on the framework provided by these documents, each Samvera community member has a role to play in creating and promoting a welcoming and safe community. If a situation arises that may represent a violation of our code of conduct or anti-harassment policy, and you feel you cannot or should not address it alone, please contact a member of this year's program committee, a member of the Samvera board, or a helper. We are well positioned and prepared to assist you. And the contact information for these are the helpers for the day, and you can reach us either through a Slack DM, or you can send email, and there's also information on the wiki. Okay. So we're a little early, but I think we can roll into the next up. So next thing is project updates. And I'm not sure if the presenters have agreed on an order of them, but I guess I will assign an order as on the slide. So the first one up is the Avalon update given by John Cameron.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Slides up. All right. Good morning. I'm John Cameron from Indiana University Libraries. And I'm going to go ahead and give the Avalon update. So I begin by, what is Avalon? Avalon is a Samvera solution bundle for audio and video access. So it's an access platform that's designed to be an easy way for people to get content up. It offers easy transcoding, very granular access control for teaching and learning restrictions or licensing restrictions, and a lot of features that at least we try to make it nice for media on the web. So we've been supported by grants in the past from the Mellon Foundation, IMLS, and our latest release is Avalon 7.4. But first I'm going to do Avalon team update. So welcome Emily, please. Emily Linema is our new head of digital media software development at IU Libraries. So please say hello if you haven't met her yet. It's been great to have her. She's taken on Maria's former position that was open in our department. I think at Virtual Connect, I sort of had a posting for it, but we're very excited to have Emily in that role. So the Avalon team as it stands here, you can see Emily is again taking over Maria's position. So she's kind of the scrum master, but also helping to do a lot more with Avalon in the community as well. Otherwise, it's all of us there. Okay, so one new thing in Avalon is, let's see, the wiki migration. So this had been done over the summer, but for a long time, the official Avalon documentation was in a IU Libraries hosted Confluence instance. And there were a lot of references to it. And so the big thing was basically getting a dump of that and loading it up into our Samvera Confluence so we could have our documentation here in the community. So everything is fully migrated now. In addition to migrating over to Samvera Confluence, we cleaned up a lot of the organization of the documents themselves. So a little bit you can see on the left, but it's more targeted toward, so you can see installation and configuration, documentation, and then technical documentation. So things have been cleaned up a lot, and all of our links and everything has been updated. So please go check it out if you haven't. And I'm really happy that we were able to do that in the community. All right. So what's new in Avalon? Our latest release, Avalon 7.4, was in July. So this one was mainly dependency updates. So probably not a surprise to a lot of people here. But Rails 6, Bootstrap and Blacklight updates, those are fairly time intensive. There were a lot of breaking changes and customizations that we had done. So it was a big release to get all our dependencies up to date and keep that rolling, especially because we have a lot of Avalon instances out there. Other updates were a lot of performance updates to the manage users page. The manage users page, is an instance of the persona library. And let's see. And so we've just added things to make that sort of management easier. And especially, you sort of hit those things as it scales. We in Media Collections Online have like a lot of users. Let's see what else. Yeah, so Google Drive, we also added the ability to have it as a source alongside other file system options. It was one or the other before. And then we also increased some sanitization options for file names during post-processing in this case, where there's an extra hook where you can set up different sanitization options. And so this is part of really a drive to keep things going to make Avalon, I guess, as less brittle as possible and really make it so you can sort of throw anything in there and have it be processed as you like. So what we're working on now, next release will be Avalon 7.5. The big one here is controlled digital lending. So this is a feature that we've been working on that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. But we've also been working on performance increases. So in particular, loading pages with a lot of sections in Avalon has always been a little bit slow. And so there's been some excellent work on our team to get that really, really going faster. So the time to first byte is incredibly increased, especially for objects which have a lot of children. And the other thing we've got is video support in Timeliner. So the Timeliner is a port of the variations Timeliner. I've numbered it here many times. But before, even though you had a video stream in the Timeliner, it would only show an audio player. So now you can actually do those Timeliner annotations on a video and have the video display in line as well. So that's a really cool update. So controlled digital lending. Yeah, we're working with Michigan State University to implement this functionality in Avalon. So I'm going to talk about this more on a lightning talk on Thursday. But essentially it is access limited to a single user at a time. So it's, sort of that model where you have to borrow an item to actually get access to the media stream. And let me take a look at this. So I've got a couple of screenshots here. These are a little early. But as you can see, like now you would go to a media item, it'll prompt you to log in or it'll ask you to borrow. And once you borrow the item, the stream will actually authorize. And then we also have a page here where users can manage all of their checkouts, and then administrators as well can return or edit those. So IIIF community work we continue to do. There's been some community work, particularly to improve interoperability. So testing different manifests from different providers for different consumers. So in this case, working to update our manifest generation parsing, we have multiple things that use IIIF now. So we have the timeline in Avalon, manifests that are coming from objects in Avalon, and then the Avalon IIIF media player. So we have a lot of sort of things to work on in terms of making sure that everything in the community is as interoperable as possible. And especially with presentation 3, it's kind of a new thing, and there's been a lot of implementation sort of deals there. Let's see. So what's next? Avalon and Hyrax, we're still working on this. So we're reevaluating the initial work that we had done years ago and thinking about what will our approach be. So we still want to look at this, especially in terms of community alignment, making sure we're all using the same libraries. But there are many strategies and ways that we could go about it. How are we going to estimate the work? So this is a big project that we're currently working on organizing, and we've been going through evaluating Hyrax, evaluating our own approach, and basically trying to plan this out and see how we can get this going in the future. So you can get in touch with us. The Avalon channel in Samvera Slack is public. And then we have a mailing list, and of course on our website. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. So I guess we have 5. Okay, well, I guess I'm not sure your questions or not. I think we'll just go to the next update and we'll throw in questions at the end. So next up would be the Hyrax update, which is Julie Hardesty.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, it's going to be Julie Hardesty and Daniel Pierce. So let me share my screen. And all right, is that working?
Yeah, that works great. Okay. We can see it.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Hardesty. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a metadata analyst at Indiana University. I'm the current Hyrax product owner, and along with Daniel Pierce, programmer analyst also at Indiana University, and currently the Hyrax technical lead, we invite you to join us on a little journey through the Hyrax community update, which is apparently going to include a lot of images of the outdoors and nature, because it just seemed to be very soothing when we were putting this together. So we both work at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, and Daniel and I are speaking with you today from the ancestral homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people. The work we are doing as the Samvera community should serve to support and uplift the needs of displaced Indigenous communities in the same ways we work to be inclusive and welcoming to all who want to contribute to Samvera software and participate in this community. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge where we are in the pandemic and what has occurred over the last 2 years. It happens to coincide with much of my time as Hyrax product owner, but this moment we are in now seems like a slight turning point in a pandemic that has been deeply traumatic in varying ways for everybody. It's been hard to deal with and live through regardless of your situation. There are enough of us gathered here that I think it is probably true that many of us know someone or love someone who is no longer here due to the pandemic. And it might seem a little jarring to talk about this during a slide deck on software development, but our collective reality is that we have made it through something. And in this part of our lived experience, we've made it through that together. We're not completely out of the pandemic either, but the fact that we are all still here and still coming together as the Samvera community means something that I think is special and should be recognized. I am certainly glad that you all are here. And if this is your first Samvera Connect, welcome to our community. You found a wonderful group of people, and I am even more glad that you are here. And one more thing that I cannot let go by without saying something about is the fact that our meeting this year turned virtual, not because of the pandemic, but due to legislative decisions made by the state of Indiana, the state in which Daniel and I both live. The legislature's decision to pass a law that bans transgender girls from playing sports on girls' teams is discriminatory and has caused at least one state to ban state-supported travel to Indiana. We were going to hold this meeting in person at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, but I'm so thankful that this community centered its members and recognized that conducting our meeting here would mean we don't find transgender lives and concerns important enough. LGBTQ+ rights are BIPOC rights, which are neurodivergent rights, which are women's rights, which are accessibility rights, which are all in fact human rights. And none of us can be our complete selves until we all can be our complete selves. So I am very glad we are meeting virtually for Samvera Connect this year. And thank you all again for being here. And now a little introductory information about Hyrax. Hyrax is a software engine built using Ruby on Rails that can generate a digital repository application for discovery, access, and management of digital collections. And you can see a screenshot there of a Hyrax-based application. And Hyrax are also the cute but fierce animals pictured here that like to hang out around rocks. Within the Hyrax portion of the Samvera community, we have the Hyrax interest group, and it is open to anyone interested in keeping up on or catching up on the latest happenings with Hyrax development work. We regularly discuss maintenance and release work, Valkyrization work, which we'll get to more on that in a minute, and topics like the Hyrax maintenance policy and NewRax, our demo and testing sites that show the latest code changes deployed in a working application. Speaking of the Hyrax maintenance policy, it is still in draft form and not finalized or published yet. I will be completing that work soon, and we'll be bringing that back to the Hyrax interest group for final review. So if you are interested in any of that, the Hyrax interest group meetings occur monthly on the second Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. It's right before the weekly Samvera Tech Call. And our next meeting is November 9th, and I hope that you will consider joining us. As Hyrax product owner, I'm also part of the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group, which is a terrific group of people who work to maintain Hyrax, addressing bugs and pushing general development work forward. Daniel Pierce, as our Hyrax technical lead, is the main development force behind this working group, and Rebecca Cuddy has been essential to testing issues and running quality assurance on merged pull requests to address known issues. We sprint on a regular 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off schedule, and Jessica Hilt keeps us organized on the calendar so that we know when all of that is happening. You might also see some news on this slide that we will make more of a fuss about here in a minute. And it is not the fact that these are actually meerkats, but yeah. Since Samvera Virtual Connect in May, we released Hyrax 3.4.2, which is our current stable release of Hyrax. It includes an upgrade to Bixby, a pin for the Tiny MCE Rails gem version, and backports for analytics, and some structural changes and dependency updates to keep the 3.x build working. In addition to that release, major efforts in our second cycle of development work from May to August were put towards upgrading Blacklight, Bootstrap, and Rails, similar to what Avalon has gone through. And the 26 issues that were closed on that cycle's GitHub project board were all related to that work. Our current project board for the September to December development cycle is also showing progress with 4 more issues closed already. This work has involved many more people than just those on the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group, and I want to extend a special thanks to Fritz Freiheit and Connor O'Malley from the University of Michigan, Adam Arling and Matt Jordan from Northwestern University, and Ayub Balemli, Brad Watson, and Emily Porter from Emory University for fulfilling the pledges that they made to work on Hyrax this spring and summer. Along with Tamsin Johnson, Margaret Keeby, and Alexander Dunn from UC Santa Barbara, who are always willing to jump in and help out. All of this work is for the version of Hyrax that is built to connect specifically to Fedora 4. Other development efforts that also involve the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group involve changes to allow for connections to other backends, such as Postgres and Fedora 6. That backend work is what we refer to as Valkyrized Hyrax. Valkyrization work for HIRAX was helped along immensely by the recent community effort that occurred in September. Several community members joined the HIRAX maintenance working group, including Anna Marie Close from Ohio State University, John Cameron and Chris Colvard from Indiana University, Gabriela Montoya from UC San Diego, Fritz Freiheit and Jose Blanco from University of Michigan, and Alexander Dunn and Tamsin Johnson from UC Santa Barbara to work through 18 issues on that project board and show through testing on NeurAx PG, the demo site we have for Valkyrized HIRAX, that we are more than 3/4 of the way to a fully functioning Valkyrized HIRAX-based web application with a Postgres adapter. That's pretty exciting. A major part of both development efforts, the releases we've already talked about and other releases we'll be discussing today, is the fact that Daniel Pierce came on as HIRAX technical lead beginning in July. He was already a regular participant on the HIRAX maintenance working group and has been able to keep focused time and effort on moving both HIRAX on Fedora 4 and Valkyrized HIRAX moving forward, helping others get involved and facilitating the development work and releases. So thank you, Daniel. And if all of that isn't exciting enough and showing the continued engagement of Samvera community members, I am also happy to introduce the next HIRAX product owner, Rebecca Cuddy, who is the institutional repository librarian at UNC Chapel Hill. You have probably seen and heard her name before associated with HIRAX because she has been part of the HIRAX maintenance working group for 2 years. I'm thrilled to be passing along the product owner role to Rebecca because this is showing that we are overcoming challenges that we experienced previously with the HIRAX product owner role. We're managing development work more smoothly, and we are transitioning people into and out of these roles without burnout and with a lot less frustration. I will be continuing to participate as a member of the HIRAX maintenance working group for the rest of this year, and I will be pledging hours for Samvera work next year as well. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca. And I do have some kind of blue sky thinking that I want to share about the HIRAX product owner role. We recognize the importance of both the technical lead and product owner roles for HIRAX to maintain the software and continue its further development. The community decided recently that the technical lead should be supported with funding for the time spent by the person in that role. And I think we are seeing a difference in time spent more consistently and evenly when it is funded as a portion of a person's schedule versus time spent as a volunteer. As a volunteer in the HIRAX product owner role, I know I've worked this into my schedule as best I can, but I will admit that sometimes that can be kind of last minute. I think the HIRAX product owner role would also benefit from the same type of community funding to ensure consistent and more even time spent on managing and prioritizing the issues and features we work on for HIRAX and engaging in discussion with community stakeholders about what's needed from HIRAX as we continue into the future. So I'm handing this talk over to Daniel Pierce now to go into more details on the work that has been happening and upcoming work that you can be involved in. But I just want to express my gratitude to you all for this experience as HIRAX product owner. I've learned new skills and have really come to appreciate the community that we've developed across institutions and expertise. I am excited to continue participating, and I'm looking forward to seeing how HIRAX continues to develop. So thank you again, and over to you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you, Julie. That was a great introduction. I feel like I don't need to say anything about myself except hello. But yes, I'm Daniel Pierce, the newish HIRAX technical lead since July. So since then, I was just going to give a quick kind of update on where my focus has been. That focus has been on getting HIRAX 4 out, and there's a list of the big features of that release there. You might notice that they're not so coincidentally very similar to the major features that John Cameron just mentioned about Avalon. Blacklight 7, Rails 6, Bootstrap 4. Those all ended up requiring a lot of changes to the application itself in various ways. And we actually did put together the beginnings of some documentation about what to expect during that migration. There's a link to it from the beta 1 release notes for HIRAX 4. Another thing to call out that is coming with HIRAX 4 is a new way of doing nested collection indexing that offloads it to Solar's graph query. Thank you to Chris Colvard for coming up with that idea and implementing it. Yeah, so HIRAX 4 is currently in a beta 2 release that came out about 2 weeks ago. It has a bit more work to be done on it, mainly around some final deprecations that or deprecated code that needs to be taken out. But I expect that a release candidate and perhaps an actual release will come out during the next maintenance working group sprint, which I think is next week. Starting next week. Yeah, so next slide. Alongside that, as Julie mentioned, has been a lot of work on getting Hyrax to be fully Valkyrieized, as we like to say. She did a great job of going over who contributed that, so big thank you to everyone who's done that. Couple highlights is we now have, for those that are familiar, there is a test application in Hyrax called DASI that allows you to spin up the stack locally in a Docker container very easily. DASI is the one that runs with active Fedora and Fedora 4 in the back end. I came up with a copy of that called copy that runs purely on Valkyrie and Postgres, just so we can more easily test that environment. You might be curious about the name copy. It's actually a term for a kind of a lonely outcropping of like a mountain, specifically in South Africa, that Hyraxes like to dwell in. It's just kind of a convenient name. Anyway, so in progress is a few things to wrap up, especially around actually getting files and images to show up in a universal viewer. Excuse me. It's expected that this should be in some sort of beta release at some point during the Hyrax 4 cycle. A little bit more about that in a minute. But I think we are planning to have a Dev Congress in January, and I'm hopeful that after that, we should be in good shape to actually get this into kind of beta status, MVP, you might say. Next slide. So one question I've gotten quite a few times is, what is happening with Fedora support, essentially? I'm hoping that this chart gives a general idea of the big idea, which is currently active Fedora and Fedora 4 is what's supported in Hyrax 3. That's going to be continued to be supported in Hyrax 4. And it will still be around in the next major version of Hyrax, which Hyrax 5, presumably, if there's no other major releases needed. But we would start deprecating its support at that point, with the intention to have it fully removed in a later major release. As I said, the version numbers there are subject to change. I don't want to get tied to, as we were a few years ago, where everyone was thinking, oh yes, Valkyrie will be Hyrax 3 or 4, whatever number it was. There could be other major changes that need to happen before then. We'll see. So along with that is the Valkyrie support is either work in progress and beta at this point, or in the case of the Fedora 6 backend, we're starting work on that. I mean, in theory, it should work transparently, or that there shouldn't be any real difference between having Postgres backing Hyrax or Fedora 6, thanks to the use of Valkyrie. That is yet to really be tested, but the plan is for there to be a major version of Hyrax that has both active Fedora support and Valkyrie support in a fully working capacity, and that's in order to ease transitions. And eventually, active Fedora be phased out. Next slide. So to make all that happen, it would be, I encourage everyone here to pledge maintenance hours for Hyrax. It's been a huge help in the past year. It doesn't have to be a constant thing, even just saying, yeah, me or my team will sign up for 1-2 week sprint. That's great. We can find things to focus on for that. It's been a huge help. As mentioned, we have a Dev Congress coming up. Participation in that can also count. So please consider doing that. It's very important for the future of Hyrax. Next. Finally, a quick mention that the new rack servers, which are instances of Hyrax that are hosted on the public internet, have become really useful for doing our testing, and I think it's also been very helpful for various application product owners to see what Hyrax can do. The current host of those servers, DCE, has requested that they be moved to a new home, and so there's ongoing talks with the board and the community about where they will live and what the future of them is. But I just want to bring that up, the visibility of that up to the whole community here. And next, I think that's the end. Yeah. So I don't know if we're doing questions now or at the end of this whole session, but there's Julie and Maya's contact info. Please reach out, either email or Slack or whichever way you feel comfortable with. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both, Julie and Daniel, for giving that update. And I think we'll do questions at the end of the session. So why don't we move on to the next update, which would be the haiku update. This would be Kevin Konchinsky.
Hello, everybody. A lot of great updates from Julie and Daniel, but mostly, can I just say those were really beautiful slides? They make me want to take off this afternoon and go for a hike. But since I just said that in front of 100 people, I probably can't do that. So we've got a haiku update from the community, and I will try to move through this pretty quickly, but hopefully informatively. What is haiku? Darn you, autocorrect. Perennial issue. Anyway, haiku is a repository solution that's based on the Hyrax engine, and it takes all those components of Samvera and delivers a relatively turnkey repository. Many of you might know that, but I always like to make sure that folks who are new to the community and to the conference to get the 30-second background. I have a few general updates. What's going on with haiku releases. Back in May, we released haiku 4. That included advanced theming, it included cross-tenant search, the ability to have multiple domains per tenant, configuration overhaul, and also a consolidated build and deploy environment with Hyrax. Our next release is going to be version 5, which should be in beta this week. It'll be out very soon. This includes an upgrade to Hyrax 3.4, which will bring in the analytics work that's been really anticipated by the haiku folks. It'll have an upgrade of many of the underlying components. It turns the bulk racks import-export tool on by default. And this is going to be a full version release because it requires data migration and the review of any overrides related. It's currently in testing and we are updating release notes. And as I said, that should be out very soon. Development is in progress already for what will be haiku version 6. This is going to upgrade to Hyrax 4, Blacklight 7, and Rails 6 or 7, depending on timing. And it will likely require another database migration and thus a major version number. As Rob Kaufman notes, we're really burning through those version numbers, but luckily there are infinite numbers that we can use. It's also going to include some features like PDF, the ability to split PDFs out of the box, serverless IIIF support, and groups and permissions overhaul. We're going to try to get those into the next release. The Haiku Interest Group meets on Zoom the last Thursday of every month, except this month because we canceled it for Connect. But in this call, we do project updates. We get to hear from everybody that's working on a Haiku project. We discuss the roadmap alignment. So features that are coming into those projects, we decide whether they should go into the core code or not. We'll hear release updates and updates from the Haiku technical developer call that we have. And I just love to enforce that this is a great place for newcomers, people who are interested in haiku. I've heard a lot of folks that are exploring haiku this year. I invite them all and everybody else to just come and listen, come and ask questions. But it's a great place to hear the current users kind of interacting about what's coming in the pipeline. Was really excited. Many of us were able to meet up at Open Repositories in Denver in June, and for a lot of us, this was the first in-person conference that we had in a few years, and some of these people were meeting in person for the first time. It was a lot of fun, and it really reminded us what community was all about. So some quick updates on projects that are currently in development. University of Louisville's digital collections. SoftServe has completed work of adapting a Hyrax newspaper gem that will allow import of complex compound objects for them. We've also adapted code to allow for custom URLs, which are generated by a metadata field, custom download sizes, and more sort options for search results. Louisville is currently importing all of their content DM content into Haiku using the bulk racks tool. Ubiquity Press has some news. Over the summer and autumn, the Ubiquity team have been busy rolling out their repository platform that they have to new customers. This includes Lawrence Technological University, which was a new repository, University of North Georgia, and Boston College Law School were migrations from bpress. As well as migrating from bpress, onboarding work includes the creation of new work type models. Ubiquity is very happy that these customers, plus others that are in the pipeline, represent a strong vote of confidence in Haiku today. Additionally, there have been some personnel changes at Ubiquity, with Aaron McCullough appointed as product director, replacing product manager Elisa Barrett, and he's working from the US. Also, Delaney Burke was joining as the senior Ruby developer, and he works from Estonia. So welcome to the community to Delaney and Aaron. British Libraries shared research repository in collaboration with CoSector, and SoftServe also welcomes a new team member. So welcome to Graham Javon as a digital services specialist starting November 1st. Upcoming work in the next bit with CoSector and SoftServe includes the ability to import and export XML files, improvements to viewer functionality, including PDF viewer, 3D models, audio and video, also in-viewer search, and a metadata display in the UV. And they've also added the addition of open access status to the OAI PMH. They say that'll help them achieve full compliance with Plan S technical requirements. It'll also be necessary for anybody using Haiku that receives funding from a member of Coalition S. So it can be a requirement for a lot of global funding bodies, and that should be valuable to high potential adopters when it gets contributed back. Palni and Palsi continue iterative work on Haiku for consortia. They're running Haiku Commons as a multi-tenant repository service with an adaptable operational model across 4 participating consortia. Currently, there's 16 tenants in production and 39 in pilot or test. And just a reminder, this is in 1 instance of Haiku. There's continued focus on their user community to share expertise and strategize future development. Now, in the 2nd year of the IMLS grant, Haiku for Consortia Removing Barriers to Adoption, the Haiku Commons User Experience Report was released in June 2022. They recently completed development sprints that focused on improving bulk import and export in Haiku with bulk racks. And they're currently working with SoftServe to upgrade Haiku Commons to the as yet released or yet to be released Haiku 5. And they are going to work on redesigning the Haiku Commons index homepage, and will be undertaking a sprint of high priority bugs and maintenance improvements that have been identified by their community. They're working on a draft operational model shared repository toolkit, and they will share that back and seek feedback from the community very soon. In the remainder of the 2nd year of their grant, they plan to complete a front-end user experience study and complete a series of additional development sprints, potentially addressing metadata customization and configuration, backend workflows, and front-end display. The Adventist Digital Library is sponsored by Andrews University in conjunction with SoftServe. They're migrating from an existing Islandora application. It's a dual tenant. One consists of citation only, works with no files. They're continuing this content migration and preparing for some additional work before they go live. And that's going to include some theming updates for them, updates to search filters, and full text search that includes highlighted search terms in the viewer. And they'll be utilizing Abby for OCR instead of Tesseract. University of Tennessee in Knoxville is a newer player in Haiku, which we're really excited about. It's a multi-tenant Haiku for digital collections in an institutional repository. Current work with SoftServe includes initial Hyrax 3 upgrade into Haiku, which also provided the work for the upcoming Haiku 5 release. The installation of Allenton Flex for flexible metadata is local to their Haiku instance. And there have been some improvements in accessibility and also upgrades to the III manifest gem that'll make it IIIF version 3 compliant. And some odds and ends. Just a reminder that there are hosted solutions out there. Ubiquity Press has uRepositories and SoftServe has Haiku Up. And both of those have information on websites where you can learn more. And follow us, follow Haiku. There's always news, there's always community activity. I'm happy that there's usually 15 people or more on the interest group calls. Haiku.samvera.org is an informational site. Samvera Slack has a Haiku channel. If you're not on Samvera Slack, you should be. So go to the wiki and request to join there. We have a Google group. More details on the interest group, which is the last Thursday of the month at 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern, 4:30 UK. There's details on that on the Samvera wiki as well. And the developer call is the second Thursday of the month at 9 Pacific, though that's been kind of touch and go. But we're looking forward to some new folks potentially joining those for conversation. And since I failed to introduce myself at the beginning of this, just a reminder, I'm Kevin Kochansky. I am client liaison at SoftServe, and I work with the Haiku community. And that's everything I've got. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So we'll do the last update, which is the Valkyrie update by Alex Dunn, if you're ready.
I am, yes. I don't have slides. I'm going to try and keep this relatively brief. I'm Alex Dunn. I am the digital library architect at UCSB and the product owner for Valkyrie. Most of you probably know what Valkyrie is, and Daniel talked about it a bit during the Hyrax update, but it is a piece of software that a repository can use to allow it to talk to different backends, both for metadata and indexing, like a Solr search engine, or for data storage, like Postgres or Fedora, without having to worry about the particulars of the backend it uses. So Valkyrie serves as an intermediary. So you just tell Valkyrie what you want to do, and Valkyrie handles talking to whichever backend you've configured. So it kind of abstracts away from the particulars of what you're doing. And we are currently coming up on our 3.0 release. About a year ago, actually, around the 2021 Connect, we had our first 3.0 beta, and we've been kind of finishing up feature work, finalizing things, squashing bugs in preparation for a real release. In the year since, the big kind of items have been Faraday 2 support from Trey Pendragon, who is the tech lead for Valkyrie. He and Carla Galarza also brought in Rails 7 support. And Tamsin Johnson added the ability to configure multiple storage adapters. Also, Margaret Kibbe added Ruby 3 support just recently, and that allowed us to tag our first release candidate for Valkyrie 3.0. Those are kind of the big things. We don't have any kind of flashy new features. It's mostly been getting things up to speed and making sure we're ready to push this new release out the door. And we've just begun making sure to test it with Hyrax to make sure 3.0 is compatible, because currently Hyrax uses the older Valkyrie 2, which is, as you might have guessed, a little out of date now that we've been kind of very slowly working on 3.0. So those are the big things. Daniel also talked about Fedora 6 support. So he covered kind of the gist of it, which is that the ideas are all there. Currently, Valkyrie is passing tests, the tests that we have written for our Fedora adapter against Fedora 6. So as far as we know, it works is kind of a good way of putting it, but we don't know anyone who is using Valkyrie and Fedora 6 in production. So there's a lot of stress testing that still needs to be done. So if you are someone using Fedora 6 and you're interested in Valkyrie, we would love to have you join us and help test it out and make sure that it's robust. So I think that is everything I have. So I think I'll just end it there. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So I want to thank all the updaters for the updates. And I also want to especially thank Julie for calling out at the beginning of her presentation where we are and yeah, so because I was also looking forward to a virtual thing, but this is and I'm proud of the community for pivoting and changing to a virtual conference. So I think now for the remainder of the time, I would like to do, I think it's questions for all the presenters. And I know that there is already one in the Zoom Q&A, which is for John. And it was, John, what's the landing period, number of user access for media? Oh, so this is a question about, I guess, the control digital lending. Is John still around?
Yeah. The lending period is configurable by a number of different ways. There's system, collection, and then individual media object level that it can be configured from. So like other things in Avalon, it's a collection level value that gets inherited by the objects on creation. So you can set it, yeah, for individual items to be different lengths or durations or per collection. Yeah, and for our control digital lending implementation, there's only a single items can only be checked out in a single instance or by a single user at one time.
Are there other questions anyone has on any of the updates?
And we have a raised hand, so I turned on talking
Okay.
permission for Tao.
Yes, could you do that? Okay. Would you like to ask your question? I'm not sure. Can you talk? All right.
Oh, I just post. I'm new to all these Hyrax stuff. What does it mean to use Postgres as storage? Does it mean we use Postgres to replace Fedora?
Yes, that's the idea. So instead of using Fedora to persist the data, it is stored as JSON in Postgres.
Oh, another question for the Haiku people. Are the Haiku features like the newspaper jam, PDF viewer, all the haiku stuff, are they transferable to Hyrax application?
Would any of our updaters like to?
This is Jeremy. I can answer that. We've done several haiku things. Yes, they are transferable with some work on your part. Trying to work them back into haiku and then looking at on Hyrax.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question in the Q&A is in the chat. It was for either Daniel or Alex. Will Valkyrie Hyrax still support Fedora 4 without active Fedora?
As far as I know, the answer to that is no, once the active Fedora part of the code is taken out. Since I would rely on like Valkyrie talking to Fedora 4. So, I mean, maybe that's possible if someone wants to look into that, but I don't think that's in the plan currently.
Yeah, once Valkyrie drops support for Fedora 4 in its adapter, then yeah, that'll be that. Thing about Valkyrie is anyone can write their own adapter. So if that was something necessary for your institution, it would be possible for you to write a specifically Fedora 4 adapter for Valkyrie that would allow you to have that compatibility. But that's not something that's being developed right now.
Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions? All right, I just want to encourage people, if you do have other questions, like everyone, please ask them in the Samvera Slack on the Connect channel. Everyone seems to be in there. And meanwhile, our next, we now have a break. The next talk is, we have a few extra time actually. So the next talk is supposed to start at 12:20 Eastern. I don't know. So at 20 after the hour. So I think we'll just take a break until then. So that's about, see about half, I can't do the math, but about half 15 minutes. So, all right, I'll see you back. Okay, hello, everyone. Welcome back from break. So let's see here. So the program continues. The next up is Michael Klein. Is Michael Klein, are you here, Michael?
I am, yes.
Okay, so virtual conference. Okay, so Michael Klein will be presenting on developing for the cloud in the cloud. You want to take it away? Here, there we go.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Michael Klein. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the software development tech lead in Northwestern University Library's repository and digital curation work group. I'm speaking to you from Northwestern's campus in Evanston, Illinois, which sits on the unceded lands of the Council of the Three Fires, consisting of the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa people. Today, I'll be talking about our transition over the past several months to a largely cloud-based development environment hosted on Amazon Web Services. I'll start with both an apology and a gentle warning. This talk is fairly jargon-heavy and veers off pretty sharply into the ops side of DevOps. As much as I hope that the next 15 minutes or so will have at least a little bit to offer most of you, it definitely goes from zero to nerd pretty quickly when I hit the 5th or 6th slide. Though I suppose nothing I do ever starts at zero nerd, but let's just say it'll ramp up. I'm not going to dwell on this slide for too long, but I wanted to share just a little bit of an overview of the dependency stacks that support our 3 main backend applications, 2 built on Samvera frameworks and 1 built in Elixir. This doesn't even get into our front-end React applications, APIs, or other services, but you can see that we've got a whole lot of dependencies, a lot of which are hard to emulate locally. I started making slides detailing how we got to this point, describing each of the Docker container-based dependency stacks and accompanying homegrown tools we've used over the past 4 years. Then I realized I could easily run through my whole 20 minutes and never get to my topic. So this is all of the deep historic overview you get today. There's not a lot in here that was important, but it's just to make it clear that we've been through a lot of different options over the years. Our team of 5 developers maintains several different applications and APIs with different dependency stacks. As our software ecosystem has moved more towards serverless applications, functions, and services, it has become increasingly difficult to maintain a laptop-based development environment that can adequately replicate or emulate the entire suite of dependencies we rely on. We also found that our architecture decisions were becoming constrained by the need to run or at least connect to everything locally. To that end, I set out to build a fully remote development environment inside an AWS EC2 virtual machine. It relies on a combination of shared and individual resources, shared for things that won't interfere with each other during simultaneous use, and individual for things that need to be kept separate, like data storage and message queues. Each developer has a dedicated instance for their own use that boots itself up on demand and shuts itself off when idle. Since AWS only charges for EC2 instances when they're actually running, the idle time shutdown helps keep the cost of the service as low as it can be. The primary goal in building this tool was to create an environment where the entire breadth and depth of AWS services could be available to us to experiment with and incorporate into our application stack as needed. But another very high priority was to allow each developer on the team to continue to work to the greatest extent possible with the same tools, customizations, and configurations they're already comfortable with. Last, but certainly not least, was the need to create something that was relatively easy to stand up, tear down, and maintain. The core of the environment consists of an AWS virtual private cloud split into 2 subnets, one internet-facing public subnet and one fully firewalled private subnet. Each developer has a dedicated virtual machine located in the public subnet that can access resources on both sides of the firewall. By default, there are no open ports in the security group containing the EC2 instance, not even the SSH port used for connecting. All connections are made via an AWS Session Manager connection, which is able to open an SSH section on the virtual machine without an open port. This is the part I was warning you about earlier. The piece that makes this IDE-based development possible is the Visual Studio Code Remote SSH plugin, which installs a full headless copy of Visual Studio Code on the remote machine. The entire VS Code environment, including extensions and settings, runs on the server while using the local copy as its user interface. The remote VS Code server inherits the local settings, but can override any or all of them, making it easy to differentiate local and remote windows by using colors, fonts, and themes. One of the primary seamless convenience features built into the dev environment is that the SSH client can trigger it to boot up if necessary. This is made possible through the use or possibly misuse of the SSH proxy command configuration option. Normally, it's used to tell an SSH client that we have to connect to one server by first connecting to another and proxying the connection through it. But in our scenario, we're telling SSH, whenever someone asks for a connection to a server ending with dev.rdc.library.northwestern.edu, run this script instead and pass it the hostname and port. That script then executes a series of steps. First, it extracts the hostname, in this case, MBK. It queries the AWS EC2 service for a virtual machine with a project tag equal to dev environment and an owner tag equal to MBK. On finding one, it checks to see if it's running. If not, it tells the AWS EC2 service to boot it up and then waits for it to be ready. Once the virtual machine is up and running, the script starts a server manager session connected to it, then starts the SSH server inside that session, and then hands the whole thing back to the SSH client to proceed as if it were a normal connection. This works regardless of how the SSH connection is initiated, as long as the process initiating it respects the system-wide SSH configuration. Another feature of the environment's configuration is the ability to shut itself down when idle. For our purposes, we define idle as we ran several checks and they all came back false. Those checks consist of looking to see if there is a Visual Studio Code server, code server running with an active listening port, indicating that a user is actively using their editor, an active tmux session running, indicating that the user may have started a long-running background process that they're going to come back to check on later, or as a catch-all, that a .keepalive semaphore file exists in the user's home directory. This catch-all allows the user to hold the system open even if other conditions aren't met. Note that the mere presence of an SSH connection is not sufficient to keep the system running. Here's how that works. When the system is running, it runs a script in the background once per minute. That script asks two questions. First, is there a shutdown scheduled? Second, should there be a shutdown scheduled? If the answers match, either there should and there is, or there shouldn't and there isn't, nothing happens because the desired state already matches the actual state. But if the system is idle and isn't already set to shut down, the script schedules a shutdown with a 30-minute countdown timer. If a shutdown is scheduled, but the system detects that it shouldn't shut down, it cancels the pending shutdown. This scheduling behavior lets us ask an easy question, is the system currently idle, with the option to change our minds later, instead of having to ask the much more difficult question, is the system currently idle, and if so, how long has it been idle? The last major piece of this puzzle has to do with users' ability to access services running in their own dev environments from a browser or other web client. Making sure that each environment always has its DNS name pointed at its dynamic public IP address makes connections much easier and also provides an address that matches our shared wildcard SSL certificate. Port forwarding over SSH through an SSM session turns out to be ridiculously slow. So instead, we have a convenient script that allows users to open and close specific ports in their system's security group, the AWS version of a dynamic flexible firewall, to one specific IP address, a whole network block, or to the entire internet. With our fully remote team, separated as much by internet routing as by geography, this also lets us collaborate easier by allowing us to share access to our services while in active development. Finally, we have a script that can connect a lightweight HTTPS proxy to any running service that doesn't support SSL natively. This is remarkably important to our distributed system of front-end applications, back-end services, and APIs, since it lets us run HTTPS end-to-end in the northwestern.edu domain to overcome issues with cross-origin resource sharing, same domain browser cookies, and Northwestern's central single sign-on service. So how did we build this? The first pass involved AWS's own Cloud9 service, which offers a collaborative browser-based development environment on a small persistent virtual machine. It worked reasonably well, and in fact, all of the developers except me are still using their original Cloud9-based VMs. And this talk may be the first time some of them are hearing about the changes to come. But creating the Cloud9 environment and grafting on support for Visual Studio Code required a large, complicated custom bootstrapping script and several hacky, brittle, non-standard customizations. These changes added extra steps, extra time, and a lot of potential extra error to the build process. Cloud9's defaults and assumptions also required making extensive changes to the system after it was up and running, enlarging the system's root volume, installing additional packages, including some from non-standard third-party repositories, and several other things that are far easier to do during the initial provisioning process. Cloud9 also offers a limited set of Linux distributions, none of which precisely met our needs, which required even more uncomfortably hacky customizations. The current version of the project uses Terraform infrastructure configuration files to provision all shared and individual environment resources with all dependencies and required tools installed by an EC2 first boot user script. The startup and shutdown scripts are tailored to our specific needs, and the code can be adjusted to work with any Linux distro we might choose to use in the future. Other features of our remote development environment include a PostgreSQL compatible Aurora serverless relational database that scales up and down in response to demand. Like the EC2 instances, we don't incur any costs while the database is completely idle and spun down. Each developer's SSH public keys are installed on their systems directly from their GitHub profiles, allowing for seamless authentication. SSH key forwarding allows developers to identify themselves to other systems, such as GitHub, from their dev environments without ever copying their private keys off their own laptops up into the cloud. A backup script that makes quick, complete backups of each user's home directory directly to an S3 bucket. The backup script ignores build artifacts, node modules, Ruby gems, Elixir packages, and other replaceable files. Installed versions of Node.js, Ruby, Elixir, and other language tools, as well as VS Code Server and any installed extensions, are also skipped during backup. But the backup script does record what was installed, and the restore script reinstalls all of it. The repository containing our custom scripts and tools is updated via git pull every time the user opens a shell, which allows us to propagate bug fixes and enhancements quickly. Environment-specific configuration is automatically pulled from AWS Secrets Manager, allowing configuration changes to propagate to everyone's systems with little effort. And we can set up, tear down, or rebuild an environment in a matter of minutes. All is not yet perfect, however. We still don't have a good automated solution to the developer forgets to shut down VS Code or exit their TMUX session on Friday afternoon problem, which has led to some machines staying awake well beyond when they should have been able to shut themselves down. The SSH key forwarding agent purges cached keys after 2 hours. We have a documented workaround for what to do when remote authentication fails, but it's clunky and it could be better. Once a system hits its shutdown point, you have to wait for it to shut all the way off before you can initiate a new connection and boot it back up. Due to a quirk in Cloud9's configuration, this shutdown can sometimes take several minutes. Fortunately, the new Fedora Linux-based VM that I've been using has a much shorter shutdown cycle. Visual Studio Code sometimes fails to connect on the first try. Clicking retry once or twice almost always solves the problem, but it can still cause a little bit of frustration in the short term. OpenSearch Cluster doesn't have an auto-scaling option the way Aurora's serverless database does, and since it takes so long to stop and start the service, its 7.5 cents per hour cost is one of our highest month-to-month charges. Finally, some AWS features have costs that we didn't anticipate. Most are predictable, but some of my original VPC configuration led to higher than expected and unnecessary charges until I identified and corrected those issues. We can't only talk about fun, whimsical stuff like SSH proxies and port forwarding. Some of you would like to know what we're paying for all of this. The answer is less than we expected, coming in between $100 and $150 per month. May is an outlier as we were just getting started and not using the system regularly. As I mentioned earlier, OpenSearch is by far our largest immutable expense, while the virtual machines themselves make up the bulk of each month's variable expenses. As for cost per developer, we seem to top out around $40 a month individually, with the average coming in far lower than that. The shared infrastructure, mostly OpenSearch, still accounts for more than all of us put together. The two front-end developers still do quite a bit more work on their laptops than the back-end developers, which explains why some of these bars are so much shorter than the others. But even with everyone switched over eventually, I'd be surprised to see us top $200 or so in any given month. If you made it this far, you may be curious enough to ask questions or check out the code behind the project. Here's where you can do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. There's time for a few questions. Looks like we have one.
Yes, I see that. Is the current implementation region independent to handle AWS outages? Not at present. We certainly don't have running like our standard services provisioned and running in multiple regions to let us switch over quickly, but the Terraform scripts that we have would let us stand up in a new region in probably a half hour or so if we needed to. Obviously, that doesn't help with any data we may have in our already in the database or in our indexes and S3 buckets, but we generally make a point of considering that stuff, ephemeral and throw away at any time anyway. So getting back up and running in case of a US East 1 outage wouldn't take us very long.
Okay, great. I don't think are there any more questions? Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. So next up, we have Jeremy Friesen, and he's presenting responsible and sustainable overrides. Are you here, Jeremy?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. All right. Now, if I can figure out my presentation slides, here we go. Do a little housekeeping because Zoom always puts the stuff right where I want it. So, hello everyone. I'm Jeremy Friesen. Pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a senior lead software engineer at Software Services by Scientist.com, aka SoftServe. I'll be talking about responsible and sustainable overrides today. So in Samvera, those of us who've worked in it for a while know the stack is deep. If you're new to it, the stack is very deep. And we often need to make localized adjustments to extend existing behavior. So join me as we take a tour of some responsible ways to do this. I'm going to start with some marginalia. So when I was preparing for this conference, I came up with some code examples and how-tos, and I realized I got ahead of myself. So that the code is available on GitHub at jeremyf/responsible_overrides. But for this presentation, we're really not going to look there. Instead, we're going to take a different approach that could lead us to this code base. So first, what do I mean by an override? So typically, this is reopening the upstream class object and replacing, adding, removing functional logic in your local instance, making a change locally to something that is upstream. It can also mean copying and pasting the file into the same relative load path and letting Rails pick this new file. And I want to highlight that using overrides is a natural extension of our oft-invoked aphorism. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So understand when we override something, we are deviating from the anticipated path and are now forging on our own. So we are choosing to go faster, but also a loner. And lest we forget, I want to bring a quote from Milan Kundera's Slowness. There's a secret bond between slowness and memory, between speed and forgetting. In this talk, I want to provide some background and guidance for our override journey and to help us enter into memory and conversation on both process and approach. So, responsible approach. First, let's assume you know and you must make an override, you must make a change. I ask that we assess the options, work to contain the changes, and then document and share what we've done. Assessment. Before you begin your copy-paste journey, which is the easy way, look for places in the code where there might be creases that exist. So customizations, configurations, and other sundry items. First, take a look at the configuration files. Many of the gems that we include have a configuration file, a class, and they give a lot of information about what the project is about and how we collectively approach the software a little differently. So how do we run derivatives and things such as that? I want to look at the Hyrax configuration. This is code that I recently added to allow you to configure in your application and document the derivative services that Hyrax will run and test. So for purposes of this presentation, I've made some changes to the code so that it fits on the screen. In your application's initializer, that code that we just went through, you can add either the following. You can either replace it, or you can unshift or prepend it, or you can put it at the end of the code. This is the configuration. And I choose this because it helps on the second point of the assessment, which is class methods. So throughout Hyrax, you might see, or you may have encountered class attribute or matter accessor, which is module attribute accessor. The class attribute is something from Rails, and matter accessor, I believe, is from Ruby. And these are also points of configuration. I would call them advanced configuration points because they may not be, well, they're definitely not necessarily in the configuration file, and so you're going to have to get oriented to the code. But you're already there doing the override, so take a look at what's in the neighborhood. Below, I want to touch back on the Hyrax derivative service. So I showed you the configuration in the previous slides, but in this slide, I'm showing you the actual Hyrax derivative service and how it has been adjusted to deprecate the previous means of overriding and make it more visible to use the Hyrax config. And I'm going to continue to the next page. which shows the actual derivative service as it reflects a change. Notice the services : hyrax.config.derivative services is a dependency injection, which allows us to more easily test and alter what the stack or what the derivative services are that we run. So the code inside the for method body is doing the lookup of these services. The present code in the released version of Hyrax looks like this. And this is where we have that class attribute services. Then we set the services array and do the similar logic. They're conceptually the same, these two slides, the services being injected or being called. And one example of this configuration that's been used is that in Samvera Labs, the NewspaperWorks gem makes use of this configuration. So how do we override a class attribute? That one is, you can do it in the initializer for the gem you're including, or you can put it in the config.toPrepare section of your application. This ensures that everything is ready to go in your application, and this is the changes you want to make. There are many, many examples of class attributes. The myriad of presenter classes or builder classes that you see throughout the application. In Hyrax is one case. Blacklight, it has several of those with the default processor chain or the rendering pipeline operations. So again, consider making those changes in your configure application. The other sundry items, Hyrax has several places for this. Those of us who have worked in Hyrax for a while know the actor stack. That is envisioned as being configurable. What happens when can be adjusted. Another one is the transaction container, which is successor to the actor stack and defines what all happens when we perform a transaction in Hyrax, and it's also configurable. Likewise, we have the Hyrax publisher, which is here's where you can find documentation on the application-wide publisher or Hyrax pub sub interface. So what all can happen kind of behind the scenes. Not going to dive into that. We all experience enough tech with Michael's lovely talk. Containment. Let's talk about containment. Now that we've equipped ourselves to perform an assessment, we need to make sure that we're not creating too much future grief. Let's assume you don't find a suitable crease in the code and need to do something more drastic. You have two categories that I like to think of: views and not views. The reason why views are a little different is you need to understand the Rails load path. It contains a list of directories, and we walk through each directory in order. And then when you call the require function, that parameter, which is a path, partial path to a file, we check, does the element in the array plus the partial path exist as a file? If it does, use that, and we're done with the file. Rails uses that for views, along with some other things, but we won't go there. Anyhow, if you need to make a change to a view, you copy and you paste it into the same relative directory structure in your application. The challenge is any changes you make in that view will not be immediately, any changes made upstream will not be immediately available to you. In essence, you have copy, pasted, and cut your ability to receive the updates for that view. So be careful with view changes. Historically, those are the expensive changes to manage over time. Now, over to the not views. You have two primary options. You can copy the file, again, whole cloth, and put it into that place in the load path. Or you can use this prepend a module. And I go through those patterns in the repository link there. TLDR is leverage the Ruby module.prepend or module.class eval functions. There are plenty of examples, so I won't go into that there or here. Next is minimize the code you change. Measure twice, cut once. When you do a prepend, work to change the least amount of code as possible. All code you copy or adjust is a fork in the road, and you get to eat what's at the end of that fork every day of the week from here on out. So be careful. Think of others, because when you're making a change, it's likely others elsewhere may want this change. So write and refactor accordingly. Please look to reduce surprises in your code. Follow a consistent pattern for indicating those changes in your code base. Ask yourself, how will others know about this change? Consider the logical groupings. Override several files for a similar concept. Consider placing those in a single file. One example we have is creating custom slugs. So enable to look up files by a human readable text and have that be the URL involves a lot of work in the current Samvera. So we made the choice to put them all in a single module for the work that we've done for a few of our clients. But use these modules as a documentation strategy to help folks know what's being changed. Next up is to document. You have several things you want to consider. Your application and its maintainers, both you and those who are going to come after you, as well as other adopters that might be interested, and how you will track the drift between your local application and its upstream. Next, I encourage you to document how you document these. Write up a policy or procedure and make sure folks are aware of it. At SoftServe, all of our overrides end in _decorator.rb, and we document that work in this, I believe, public URL in the slide, how to override a method from a dependency without copying the entire file over. Also consider yours and ours future self. In your overrides, consider how you might use file names, method names, documentation, inline comments, commit messages, logging, anything, all of these tools that are in service of your future self and those future maintainers. And sharing is caring. Share the how and the why of your changes. File issues in repository. Do lots of linking. Link to the pull requests on your repository in that issue. Create a fork of your changes to kind of demonstrate this. Submit a pull request upstream. Hop on the tech call. Present on it at a conference. Email it to the tech list. Jump on Slack. Share it so that we can remember it. Because the goal is to go together. Make it easy to stumble upon this information, this change. Make it easy for folks to say, yeah, I want this, and maybe we in Samvera can incorporate that into the core logic. So to reiterate, assess where you're going to make the change, contain the impact, document why and how. Your code will say what it's doing, but please document why and how. This is all in service of patrons, future selves, current colleagues, future colleagues, to help us cope with the antics of what we decided today and yesterday. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. Are there any questions? I have to say, I'm loving the dog photos, Jeremy.
Yes. So I'll read the last bit if there are no questions. We rescued several puppies and their mom for 3 months-ish in winter of 21 to 22. And it was a highlight of a dreary winter. So, and all of the puppies pictured have their wonderful forever homes.
I was wondering if they're all from your house. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Are there any? I'm trying to see if there's any hands up. For some reason I can't seem to find that. But I'm guessing there aren't.
So
All
to,
right.
to be clear, we are not hosting, we do not have all of the puppies. Orlando, Mookie, and Gambit are elsewhere. Lacey and Ollie, who were pictured in the here, the black and white is Lacey, and Ollie is the white and gray and brown.
All right. Oh, actually, do have a question really quick, and that is, how do you recommend handling testing of overrides?
Yeah, Thomas, I recommend that you write up your tests locally and really be clear what it was you were overriding. You may want to say, have a test that demonstrates the behavior that is no longer there or that is now there. Both of those are important. In some instances, I have added a raise clause. So like if this test was for a Hyrax version 3.4.1, I might add a raise clause that said, if the Hyrax version is not 3.4.1, raise an exception. And now that and say what the exception is and where to go look to see if things have changed. Because you need to be tracking what upstream and downstream, or what your local and upstream are all doing. But yeah, write your tests in your app. And look to the also look to the prior art of the tests from where you're overriding from. They may have guidance on how to do that.
All right, and then we have another question that is like, what would the refactoring, or would refactoring benefit the group more so?
Typically, it will benefit. And the thing about most of the overrides is they get to a point where you can, if you make smaller methods and methods that have a command query separation concern, it starts to get easier to make those overrides. So yes, a refactor usually does help the group, and in your local instance, you are the best equipped to figure out how that refactor would work. So take a little time to do that. And if you ever need help, please ping me on Slack. I love refactoring code.
Yes.
I love refactoring Ruby code.
Okay. Thanks for that qualification. Oh, and one other question. Can you elaborate on the advantages of prepared module method?
Of the prepend?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, prepend. So prepend will, you can use the long-standing include module directive, but prepend basically puts it at the beginning of the evaluation chain, so that when your override is running, you get access to super, the function call, in a predictable way. So you don't truly break it's almost like extending the class in object-oriented mindset of extending something without having to create a whole new class.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any more questions, so thank you very much, Jeremy.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
all right, so we have one more presentation and then the break. So next up is Rob. Are you here, Rob?
Present.
Great. So Rob Kaufman will be presenting on should this be triple IF? Right. Triple IF.
Should definitely be
PDFs.
triple IF.
Yeah. Triple IFs, PDFs, and U, right?
All right. It turns out that I type if and only if, IFF, a lot. And so the combination of that, and the fact that IF, it's easy to miss an I. Like my poor computer has no idea what I'm trying to type when I type triple IF, and it really wants to correct me. Cool. So I'm Rob Kaufman. I prefer he, him, his. And I'm here from Software Served by Scientists to talk to you about triple IF, PDFs, and U. Back in 1995 is the first time I remember encountering PDF, and I really distinctly remember it because I was buying like a lot of bargain bin video games back when you had to like reboot your Windows computer from a floppy into DOS mode to play them, and they would always have these PDF manuals, and they were just awful. Right, it was a terrible format. It was really hard to get it to open. It was slow. There's no way this thing ever catches on. And I remember very, very distinctly talking to my dad about how PDFs were a dumpster fire and we're never going to go anywhere. And yet they are everywhere. We see lots of collections that have PDFs sort of mixed in, many collections that just have huge sets of PDFs. We pass around PDFs to sign things digitally now. Like PDFs are very ubiquitous in the world today. So why is displaying PDF in a Hyrax or other Samvera application hard? There are a couple of factors. One, PDFs are both a raster and a vector format, which means that they're sets of coordinates for drawing the drawing or letters, as opposed to a bitwise format like a JPEG or a PNG file, or JP2 or a TIFF. They are compressed. There is currently an ISO standard that is supposed to tell you how to compress them, but it turns out that there's enough wiggle room in that standard that you can use one of a few compression algorithms. And whenever you get one of a few, that means you have implementations of PDF readers that don't, read every PDF that's created. PDF is still kind of proprietary. In 2008, in 1998, Adobe started an ISO standard around the PDF file format, and they, though they own the patents for PDF, they license them free to anyone making a PDF viewer or other PDF creator, as long as those PDF manipulating programs follow their PDF specification. Yet, historically, there have been many different PDF writers, especially Adobe Acrobat PDF, that add extra feature layers on top of those PDFs that make them, that provide vendor lock-in and don't really quite follow the standard, or, add stuff on top of the standard. And that causes some real issues, frankly, with reading and displaying them. PDFs are multi-page, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that's especially challenging in IIIF a little further down. And then the other thing is that PDF is native on most systems. So Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, the Wii U all come with the built-in PDF renderer application of some kind. And so in the browser, rendering PDFs has never gotten great, because you're supposed to just download them and open them. And that ability to do that and have a much better experience than what you get in Safari or Chrome or Firefox means that there's not a lot of pressure to make those in-browser PDF viewers better, frankly, because many people don't use them or even know they exist. So what are some ways to display PDFs, and specifically here a Hyrax app, though this is generally applicable across all web applications? You can just download them. If you download a PDF, oftentimes it'll open automatically. That depends on the user settings. It's nice to respect the user settings when we can. And frankly, I think that that is a perfectly reasonable way to handle a PDF. You're letting the user's computer do what it wants to do with the PDF and kind of trusting the user to have their system set up in a way that now allows that. Then there's opening it in the browser. These aren't necessarily a bad experience, though they are often not a great experience. You can open it in a new window. That can help that experience a little bit. Though then there's accessibility issues because you're jacking the window focus. There are, some pros and cons to opening it in the browser, though that is something you can supply a few headers and open them in a browser. Then there is a big set of various JavaScript viewers for opening them. This is fine for 4 or 5 page PDFs, but browsers, especially Chrome, Safari, Firefox, the main web browsers, are pretty heavily sandboxed in today and tend to be resource hogs. And so opening the PDF in JavaScript is not the most efficient way to handle it and can be pretty rough on the system and on the user's computer if they are opening it in opening a large PDF, something in the 500-600 page or more range. And then you can potentially do full PDF in the IIIF viewer, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then there's this idea of breaking the PDF up into images for use in a IIIF viewer. And that's kind of where we're going to get to in the end, but you have to bear with me for a minute while we get there. So I'm not going to talk a lot about these other methods because I want to get into the IIIF part because that is the place where I think things get the most interesting. So what is IIIF and why do we want to use it? We've had several talks already here at Connect this year about IIIF, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about what it is, but essentially it's a standard for displaying or describing the display of images, videos, audio, other high resolution objects in a way that is both scalable. So you can say, oh, I want just a tiny corner of this image at a very high resolution, or I want the whole thing at a small resolution. I want to turn them. I want to invert the colors on them. There are like lots of options you can send to IIIF. But it also with some metadata around that, you can have what do I want to say? You can say here's the attribution, here's some description metadata, lots of other things you can add to the IIIF manifest that really help round out the image that people are seeing in a viewer. So it provides it enables complex viewers. So you can do what I like to call data remixers. So the idea that you're taking multiple IIIF manifests and then you're able to look at things side by side can be really valuable. The idea that we can bring transcripts into videos or audio, I think is really powerful. Lots of just really cool technology around these IIIF viewers. They're becoming a very common standard and are really important to open access. So more and more often, institutional repositories have IIIF manifests for their assets that then allow us to kind of have this lingua franca of ways that we can view or create viewers and data remixers around them. So if we want our PDFs to be viewable in IIIF, we have basically 2 options. There's the PDF, full PDF in the viewer. So this idea renders the PDF in the UV. It's the only implementation that I am currently aware of is Apache PDF box through the Cantaloupe image server. So Cantaloupe is a very powerful and popular IIIF server, and it can support PDF out of the box with reasonable performance in version 5. Version 4, the performance was great for anything less than 10 pages and abysmal thereafter. They've done a lot of work to improve that across the board. You are then able to see in a IIIF manifest the link to the PDF as a canvas, and then it renders them in the UV. There are, however, a few downsides. This is not really part of the IIIF standard. It does not currently work in Mirador or really any other viewer that I found beyond the universal viewer. It is, and in the UV, you have to add an additional JavaScript plugin in order to get it to work in the UV. It doesn't work out of the box even in the UV. It's not widely supported. It does require you to use the Cantaloupe image server. None of the other IIIF implementations that I'm currently aware of support PDFs out of the box. It is still slow for large PDFs, and it does use Java to process those PDFs. Uses Java is programmer code for takes up all your memory. So it's kind of a resource hog. And then I think more existentially, there's a problem with the fact that we now have 2-page layout hierarchy tools, both the IIIF presentation layer and the PDF itself, that are kind of warring for control over the layout of the pages. And it doesn't currently support search in the viewer. So that is kind of a drawback. And it can only display a single PDF. So one of the things we found in one of our implementations early of this process is that if you displayed a PDF in IIIF, you could not also display images or videos. So one of the cool things about a IIIF manifest is it can display multiple documents. And when you do a PDF, it sort of takes over the UV and it won't display anything else in the manifest. So it's kind of PDF and nothing else. So you can't kind of add other things to it, which is a bummer. This is probably a bug in the UV and is probably surmountable, but at the moment, all the implementations I've seen of this have this limitation. So what if we break the PDF up? We've talked about this in the Slack channel and the dev Slack channel a few times. It's come up as a feature request to be able to display PDFs natively in our IIIF viewer. So we had a lot of conversations about this over the last few years. So the idea here is that each image is then supported by the normal IIIF process. So we're taking a PDF, we're going to break it up into each page being its own individual asset, and then serve those assets. We can then adjust resolution at that point if we don't want to, maybe our PDF is super high resolution and we want to only serve, up to a limited resolution. We could watermark them at that point if that's a requirement for us. There are a lot of possible things we can do once we've said, okay, we're going to take them out of being the PDF. It is true that Tesseract, the most common OCR library used by for large preservation projects currently, requires, if you're going to OCR PDF, that you break it up into its component pages, one for each image, and then you scan those. So that's a great time to grab those images and just kind of keep them. Then they're searchable, remixable, and available across all viewers. The PDF can still be retained for download or preservation. You don't have to throw that away, but when you're displaying is actually the images of the pages inside the PDF. The newspaper works gem. So I was really shocked and very pleasantly surprised to find that there was a gem in Samvera Labs that did this PDF work already. And so we've been utilizing it on several projects. It automatically splits the PDF up into its common component pages. It creates both TIFFs and JP2s of each page of the PDF, and it handles OCR with Tesseract. This particular gem is very focused on supporting newspapers as a whole concept. And so there are a couple other complex tasks that the newspaper gem does. It brings in several sets of work types. It handles some complex layering so that you can have a like a newspaper publication, and then you'd have newspaper issues, and then each of those newspapers has newspaper pages, and there's some complex relationships that occur because of that. It does kind of do everything for everything when it comes to the assets that you would attach to these work types. So for example, when you attach a PDF, it's going to take that PDF and it's going to split it up into its component pages. It's going to make a JP2 and a TIFF, and I think a JPEG of each and every, or a thumbnail of each one. And then it's going to OCR it and make that OCR data available in like 3 or 4 formats. And then create a single page PDF of that image that it created. So it's doing a lot all the time. And because of that, it can be kind of slow to process the derivatives. Now, this can be fixed pretty easily by just making it more easy to adjust which of the various derivative processes you want on at a given time. See Jeremy's talk that literally just happened, because that is a lot of the work he was just talking about. We've been using this newspaper gem for several haiku applications recently in order to do this process. it's been working really well for us. Honestly, being able to then have the search in the viewer, being able to see the images, those are all really great things. We have had to make some modifications to the way we display, you know, in a normal Hierarch show page, there's sort of the UV up top, and then there's the list of all the attached files, and it can get kind of redundant. So we've been doing some work to kind of make it easier to display what you do and don't want to see there. And so it is important when processing a large set of PDFs that you, I'm gonna slow down for a second. I've been talking way too fast. Okay. It is important that you process what you need. We realized for a project that has high resolution JP2s, and the JP2s are sort of the lingua franca that this application needs at the end, that we were also creating TIFFs for each and every one of those, which was wasteful. Now, if you were starting from scratch and you don't have JP2s, or you don't have an image format that you're already sort of married to, make pyramidal TIFFs. Pyramidal TIFFs are the fastest to serve from the IIIF servers that are available today, and are kind of the most versatile thing that you can create. So make that the thing you use if you have an option. Processing, splitting, and OCRing a large set of PDFs takes some serious CPU time. So we have a collection of, I want to say it's 55,000 PDFs that are very high resolution. Their average page size, we were originally told, was 20 or so pages per PDF. There were a bunch of ones that were 1, and there were a few that were 300 or so. It turns out the average page size of the actual collection is about 325 pages across the collection, now that we've blown them all out and understand how many pages they all actually have. It takes a long time to create the derivatives for 2 million plus records. It just takes a lot of CPU power. You're going to have to expect to kind of deal with that. Another big gotcha we found is that if you have Tesseract installed at all on whatever server, or in our case, Kubernetes pod, you're running fits in to do file identification, which is a normal part of the Hierarch process. If Tesseract is detected, it will OCR the files with this thing called Tika, which is a Tesseract wrapper or in Java. So when we would go to see what size an image is, we would OCR the entire thing and then completely ignore that data. Then we would take that image and we would later pass it to Tesseract to OCR it again. That costs a bunch of time, quite frankly. In the end, this process had a weird loop in it. So we would then take all the images we created and split from the PDF, put them back together in a new PDF, and then OCR that by splitting them apart again, OCRing each page, throwing all of those away and creating again. It was a whole big mess. We were spending a lot of extra unnecessary time. So be aware that this Tika, like, it's not that if you enable it in Fits or you configure Fits to use it, it's like if Tesseract is detected as being installed on the system, Fits just does it for you without asking. And it, 100x's the time it takes Fits to process a file. What are our next steps? We've been doing some initial work talking about, how to split up the functionality of the newspaper works gem. I don't want to disturb that gem, quite frankly, because it does what it's supposed to do very well, but possibly making this derivative part a dependency of it so that we can use the dependency code without it, or possibly refactoring hydro derivatives to include some of these derivative process things out of the box and then make them much easier to turn on and off at a work type level. I think could be a really powerful and useful contribution to the community. We are already working on getting these features back into Haiku. Once we're finished with this round of performance improvements, we're going to be contributing that work back, and it should be in a future work release of Haiku. At that point, if you upload a PDF, you will get it displaying in the IIIF viewer kind of automatically. We wrote a AWS Lambda for OCRing large collections of images and breaking up large sets of PDFs. We're calling that Space Stone because it's Tesseract in the cloud, and that sounds fun. Should be appearing in Samvera Labs very soon, or may already be up there. I don't remember whether I pushed that code or not. I did mean to do it before this talk, so look for that soon. And then Jeremy has been doing some work, which he talked about recently, about making it easier to kind of turn multiple derivative types on and off. And I think that that can be something that maybe gets all the way back to Hyrax, and I think would be really useful. And then getting serverless IIIF support out of the box for Hyrax. Running Cantaloupe is expensive. Running the IIIF, serverless IIIF is substantially less expensive and faster and easier. And so all those things combined make it really attractive. It does have some kind of limiting requirements, like you have to be running an AWS. In order to do the Hyrax support, you have to be using something that makes your images available from an S3 bucket. We found that Fedora, if you have your Fedora backed by S3, that we can use that kind of out of the box. And so that'll be for what this initial implementation does. All the ones with asterisks next to them, which is basically most of the slide when it was all said and done, are already in progress in one form or another. The serverless IIIF support was recently expanded to allow for JP2s, and we're working right now on kind of getting a default Hyrax configuration and some simple instructions to deploy that process. I will not advocate for serverless IIIF being the default and replacing RIF. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about making it a clear path to enable it should you want to. And that's mostly because Lambdas take a little more understanding to work, and because you have some limitations on what kinds of ways you can store your files to make them available to the serverless IIIF server. And that's it. This is where I think we should get to. Frankly, PDFs are sort of like having the authors ordered. Is something that comes up for us over and over and over again in conversations we have about Hyrax and Haiku. And so I'd really like to see this get into the mainstream so that everybody can benefit from it. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, are there any? There was a comment thanking you for this presentation.
Yeah,
If you saw that, Rob. And otherwise, I think we're going to, we have a break now. So I think actually we're just going to slide into a break, and then we'll resume at 30 after the hour. So in about 8 minutes. All right.
Great.
Thanks. Okay, it is 30 after the hour. So let's move on to the next up. So next up is a haiku for consortia project update. And I'm not sure which one of you is speaking, but
There's quite a few of us. Yeah, I will be sharing my slides.
all right, so this would be Amanda Herford. Is that right? Herford, Kristen Leonard, Jill Morris, Carl, Pereno, and Nicholas Stanton Rourke.
Yeah, myself and Nick will be presenting, and we're all here to answer questions at the end.
All right, great. Well then, let me stop sharing so you can.
Okay.
All right.
All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so hello everyone and welcome to our session. Thank you so much for attending. Kevin gave a really good overview of a lot about what we're going to talk about today, where we are in our project earlier today in the haiku update session. But today, in this session, we're going to give you some more details about what it is that we've been up to, some background information about our project and how we work together, and answer some questions about the Haiku for Consortia project, specifically removing barriers to adoption. So I'm Amanda Herford. I'm the Scholarly Communications Director for PALNI, and my pronouns are she and her. And presenting with me is PALNI's Institutional Repository Coordinator and Anderson University's archivist, Nick Stanton Rourke, and I'll let him introduce himself in a little bit. And as I mentioned, we have others on our project team here as well, including our co-PIs for the grant and our executive directors, Kirsten Leonard and Jill Morris, and they can feel free to provide as many remarks as they want to during the Q&A time, and I definitely invite your questions as we get into this. All right, so a little bit of a reminder of who we are and what we're doing. We are a consortia collaborating together on our shared vision and values for an open source, affordable, scalable, and easy to use repository solution. So together we are collectively the PALs. We are PALNI and PALC. PALNI is the Private Academic Library Network of Indiana, and PALC is the Partnership for Academic Library Collaboration and Innovation. And we are partnering on this project so that we can share expertise within our consortia and across our institutions so that we can move together towards a common goal for shared repository services. So we not only partner with ourselves, but we also partner with other consortia, other haiku users, developers, and the Samvera community at large in order to advance haiku together. So partnership is really important to this project. So a little bit about our grant. We were awarded an IMLS grant for haiku development in 2021. So it's a 2-year grant, and we are now in the second half of that grant. So this project really extends our previous work with haiku, and the focus is to really further help us to engage with our users to identify the barriers that they're finding with the platform. And we're working to address some of those barriers that we identify through this grant with development in partnership with our partners at SoftServe. So ultimately, our goal is to make haiku a more attractive solution, not just to our libraries, but to other consortia, to other collaborating groups, and to institutions seeking a repository solution. So our 3 major project goals are to first produce a comprehensive gap assessment for haiku, again, highlighting what those barriers to adoption are. Second, to complete several tightly scoped development sprints, again with SoftServe, for those high priority features that our community of users identify as major gaps. And finally, we want to contribute an operational toolkit so that others can leverage what we've learned and the resources that we've created when they are thinking about seeking a shared repository solution and ultimately managing that shared repository solution once they undertake that. So to help us with goals 1 and 2, producing the gap assessment and getting started on the user-focused development, we've been doing some UX research to help identify some major user needs. And so here's a little bit more about that process. So one of our big accomplishments over the last year has been completing our first round of UX research. And this round has really focused on the librarian workflows working with Haiku, so sort of the back end administrative functionality of working with Haiku. And here's a little bit of sort of what that process looked like. We first hired a UX consultant and met with them in order to sort of lay the groundwork for how we wanted the study to work. And the consultant then met with several of our users to talk with them in depth about their experience using Haiku. And they worked with them to gather ideas for improvement directly from the user. And the UX consultant then summarized his findings in a report which we shared with the Samvera community. So the results of the study found that our users are generally happy with the repository, but we did gather lots of helpful feedback in order to identify gaps in the areas of metadata, workflow, and user interface. So there is a blog post about this process, and the full UX report is available on our website at haikuforconsortia.org. So I invite you to check that out. And what we did with the report, we took the report and combined it with our user satisfaction survey that we ran last year, and combine those two pieces of information to make the basis for our gap assessment report that we're working on. So we have a list of gaps that is the data that's really informing the development decisions that we're making throughout our development in the grant project. So before I hand it over to Nick to talk more about that process, I wanted to share a quote from our UX report that the UX consultant put in. He said, "I encourage you to continue running a process that gives users a central role in defining, reviewing, and approving the features that are prioritized and developed." And I really wanted to share that because I think it illustrates kind of the driving force behind our development process. We want our users to be active partners in what we're doing and how we are making decisions for development moving forward. So now I'll hand it to Nick to tell you a little bit more about the user community that we've developed, some of the development that we've done so far, and some next steps.
Hi, everyone. We can go ahead and jump to the next slide. As Amanda said, my name is Nicholas Stanton Rourke, and I am the archivist at Anderson University, which is a small private liberal arts university in northern Indiana. And in that role, I am a loan arranger, and also I'm responsible for managing digital archives and also some aspects of publishing e-scholarship or making e-scholarship available online. And that role has really been an asset in my secondary role, which is as the institutional repository coordinator for the PALNI Consortium, because it's reflective of the needs of the kind of member institutions who make up a large percentage of our consortium and also multiple other consortia that we've worked with. Very often these are small private academic institutions who otherwise have not had access to institutional repository platforms of any size or scope, and so have been trying to cobble together other solutions, makeshift solutions, or just have been without. And by including them in the Haiku Commons user community, we have really kind of opened those doors for them. And so in my role as repository coordinator, I handle onboarding, maintaining documentation, troubleshooting, and also kind of liaising with our partners at SoftServe to communicate what our users are experiencing as difficulties or setbacks or frustrations or just questions, and then trying to turn that into future development. So that's the fit of that role has been really a benefit to our project. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the user community that we developed, because as Amanda said, that user community has been the driving force of this project and of the directions that we've taken development. So we've established a shared repository space that is intended to identify gaps in Haiku, to deduplicate work for the administrators of these repositories and also for ourselves in administering this grant or development, and to encourage sharing of solutions across institutions. And so there are members of both the PALNI and PALSI consortia who have repositories in the shared environment. And we also invited initially partners to pilot with us. We opened multiple tenants to Viva and Lewis, other academic consortia, and since then have been contacted by and created sandboxes, sometimes multiple sandboxes for a really dizzying number of academic consortia. My knowledge of the consortial landscape has really increased through this, but some significant ones are Skelk, Atla have contacted us, and we've created tenants for them as well. And then that's all the tenants live together on the Haiku Commons domain, but we also established a user community using the Basecamp platform, where we have message boards where users can interact with each other, share tips, ask questions, and also make recommendations for further enhancements to the product itself. And on our on the Haiku Commons domain, we currently have over 50 repository tenants, of which 40-ish are sort of active IR tenants or digital humanities tenants. Of those, 16 are public, which is to say that they're publicly listed and accessible, and the rest are private, but a good number of those are kind of ready to make the leap and be switched on to public, which of course in Haiku is a very fast thing. We can go on to the next slide. So the first major set of development that we engaged in based on our user feedback was improving the bulk import and also the export option. The export being particularly important because if we're inviting piloters to contribute materials to an active repository, there's a very good chance that they'll either be moving into their own Haiku tenants in the future or maybe to some other tenant. And so they need to be able to get that work out, right? We intend for this to be production level piloting and participation. And our users indicated to us that uploading and creating works in batches was the biggest limiting factor. And I think that's especially true for our users who are migrating out of other proprietary systems and into Haiku, but also a lot of our users had these massive backlogs of materials that had been either born digital or had been digitized, but they had, again, no repository platform to place them in. And so they had these huge backlogs and they're ready to get moving on putting them in. And so improving import was a natural step along with creating the export. So with our partners at SoftServe, we had an import export sprint that included, we upgraded bulk racks functionality, fixed a lot of the latent bugs in bulk racks. We introduced fixes to the display of inaccurate import data in the dashboard. I think we've all experienced seeing these phantom numbers or numbers that just did not seem to indicate or inform us really, just sort of these phantom bits of data in the dashboard. The dashboard is much improved now in the version that we worked on. I created the ability to export data necessary to reconstruct works in a separate repository, created metadata export for works, items, and collections, including not just metadata entered, but the internal metadata, when a work was last edited, last accessed, things like that. The export of digital objects and their thumbnails, and also introduced Baggett integration for export for increased utility with preservation systems, or just an interest in ensuring the integrity of the files that you're exporting out. And we do have a blog post about that as well, which I've just entered in the chat, and we can go on to the next slide. So what we've got going on right now is we are in the middle of an upgrade to what has been minted as, or is in the process, I suppose, of being minted as Haiku 5.0. It's a major upgrade. Certainly it's a major upgrade for us who we're running on 2.3 most recently, but it's also a big upgrade to what Haiku offers. And some of the biggest things it brings in are functional analytics, the ability to feature collections on the homepage, so you're not at the mercy of the kind of random front page collection population, cross-tenant searching, or searching across the entire site, and also some overhauls to the settings. Along with this, we are also overhauling our index and homepage on Haiku Commons. So watch this space, you'll see improvements to that homepage very shortly. And that should be finishing up by the end of this month is what we expect. And so that brings us to next steps. The next thing that we've got going on is we've already commissioned a front-end user experience study that's going to work with a number of different potential types of front-end users and mark data about what is and isn't working for them. We're going to continue focusing on user-centered development in our next set of sprints. And so the sprints that we have planned at the moment, one that we've already signed a statement of work for, takes a slightly different approach. It's kind of a mini sprint where we're picking up a bunch of high priority developments that just haven't fitted into the theme of sprints that we've done until now, and is bringing in some things that I think will be big improvements for the Haiku community overall, including the PDF triple thumbnail render error that I know has been plaguing all of us, but a number of others as well. And then after or alongside the continuation of these next several sprints, we are also developing this operational toolkit that's intended to benefit any collaborative repositories, consortial included, but not limited to consortial, and also intended to be somewhat platform agnostic. So just a toolkit for the managing of collaboration within the repository space. And so I guess that brings us to the lessons that we've learned. And one of the things that's come home most to me is just how extremely adaptable Haiku is. We've had people come to us from other consortia or other institutions with really imaginative ideas that have a lot of creative potential behind them, including the potential use of Haiku for storing materials for controlled digital lending, but also the functionality that Haiku has and the doors it opens for the kinds of institutions like Anderson University, who otherwise would not have repository software solutions. And again, Haiku is intended for this sort of pure IR, e-scholarship, faculty publications, and so on. But because it's so easy to use and adaptable, a lot of our schools are using it for digital humanities publication. And so enthusiasm for Haiku is welling up. I think we're at a critical juncture in the development. We're getting a lot of excitement from consortia and other groups. And so there's a lot of things on the horizon. And so that leads to, and some of the other lessons we've learned, just the development is very time intensive. And there's a need to streamline that development process and the interaction between user-driven enhancement and development and the somewhat limited scope of potential development that's out there. And so we're seeking creative solutions to kind of build that out. And I think especially because we're at such a critical time for adoption of Haiku, for all the things that it can do. But that said, there are still, and our current mini sprint with these high development priorities kind of emphasizes that to us, that there are these little kind of lingering or persistent frustrations, and none of them are necessarily deal breakers in themselves, but small gaps add up to barriers, and that will keep some institutional adopters away. And so closing those gaps, especially with input from our user community, is what's important, and particularly establishing what are the must-have features of a repository solution for us. And so we are excited to continue this work with input from both our immediate user community and also the Haiku community in general. And so with that, I would say thank you. And we are all here and available for questions for, I believe, the next 75 seconds, perhaps.
Yes, are there any questions? I have a question, but it's more just a general question. That is, like, do your members tend to use the IR more for like cultural heritage and library type materials, or more for like research, scholarship, and data?
I would say that observationally it's about 70-30 with the preponderance being more cultural heritage or library type materials. We do have our largest repositories are ones who are doing kind of straight IR, and some of those came directly out of Digital Commons that, like, you know, had kind of had to move out because of budgetary reasons, things like that. So our largest repositories are kind of pure IR focused, but the majority are doing cultural heritage type materials. And there's a lot of interest from people who are currently Content DM users in kind of moving away from Content DM and repurposing Haiku for the things that they would have used Content DM for. And even though they still have access to both, Haiku is the preferable option moving forward.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions, so
Thank you, everyone.
yes, thank you very much for that. So now, oh, great. I'm very happy that Heather is now here. So so this actually ends the plenary sessions for today. And plenary sessions will begin again tomorrow morning. And now we have the bird of a feather sessions. And I believe there's like 3 or so, and each one is being hosted by a volunteer, and you can find the links in the SCED site. So is there anything you'd like to add, Heather? Or
Nope, there's 2 for today.
Okay.
One is a poster session for a poster from Stanford University about spotlight exhibits for digital collections. And the other is led by the Samvera Marketing Working Group, talking about and trying to have discussions about ways to reach out to folks who may be interested in Samvera technologies in the community, and also talking about how that working group operates. So please join us. The links are in SCED. If you open up those Birds of a Feather sessions, there'll be a link there to take you to those individual Zoom webinars.
Right, great. Well, yeah, thank you for attending the plenary so far today. So.